Hello, and welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cohn, and I am delighted to serve as host for the Inside Legal ESG podcast series. For today's episode, we have with us Carla Parsons, Senior Associate at Mills Reeve. She practices in commercial and ESG work for her clients. Welcome, Carla.
Hi, Pamela. Lovely to be here with you today.
Let's just start with the description of Mills Reeve, your work there, and how you got into the ESG space.
Sure. So Mills Reeve is what we call a full service firm. So we cover everything from family and private client all the way up to major commercial contracts like I do. And it's a national firm in the UK. So we have 7 offices around England. None, unfortunately, in Scotland yet, where I'm from, but that would be lovely. But we're in London, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, Oxford, Cambridge, and Norwich. We come regularly in the Times Top 100 Employers. We're regularly rated really highly for the people side of the practice, which for me, practicing ESG is a lovely thing that is somewhere that people really like working and it values its people. And I've been here 4 years, and I really do feel that it's a firm that it really does value the people who work for it. So my area of practice, as you rightly said, is commercial and ESG. So the commercial side, I am a projects and construction lawyer. In projects, I specialise in large-scale commercial contracts, so often government contracts, procurements, and I also do student accommodation projects as well. On the construction side, that's very much more ESG related. So I tend to get involved in helping clients with their green, net zero, or sustainability requirements. So that might be anything from advising on drafting green related clauses, might be training, might be facilitating workshops around green clauses, and it might be just drafting something for them. In the ESG space, that's very different because, as we all know, ESG is a continually evolving area. So for me, that's one of the great things about doing ESG at Mills Reeve is it's very diverse. There is a group of us who all are incredibly passionate about ESG across different areas of the firm, and we make up that sort of core ESG team at Mills Reeve. And it could be almost anything that we end up doing. It could be advising clients on ESG requirements, and with more and more reporting requirements coming through, that's becoming more and more critical. It could be training. We're particularly seeing more and more clients asking for training on things like those reporting requirements, training on greenwashing, or just general ESG training. And we have a lot of different sectors here as well. So often I get involved in ESG for sectors I've never worked in as a lawyer. So last week I had a meeting with the sports team, which I love because it's really varied. We're talking about everything from the Olympics to football it's a really lovely thing to have that breadth and range of interests within a firm and things you can do. One thing I always feared as a lawyer is your job could get quite samey, but with ESG it really isn't because it's changing from day to day. So I basically do anything that kind of gets thrown at me, from writing blogs to training to doing webinars, and it's just a really lovely thing to do, and something I'm super passionate about. And how did I end up doing ESG? Well, my father is quite well known in the ESG sphere. His name was Professor Paul Watchman. He was involved in the Fretchwell's report, which changed the investment considerations around what companies should be considering in terms of investment, profit, etc. And most people listening to this podcast will know who he is, so I don't think he needs much introduction. But throughout my life, he was always very keen at getting me involved in ESG. So from a young age, it's summer holidays, and I'd be asked, I need a report written on cocoa plantations, Carla, go and do some research. And then I would help him with his writing, researching, and it's something as a family we would always talk about. So it was always a bit of a no-brainer for me going into an organization that I wanted to work in something that had an ESG aspect. And I'm very fortunate that now I find myself at Mills Reeve. It's a time when ESG is becoming more and more prominent and important for law firms and our clients. So it's yeah, my dad's fault, and also very happy that it's a happy accident I've ended up doing ESG, but it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. And I also spent a time working for a retailer, and it was all, and I chose specifically to work in roles with that sustainability aspect. So yeah, it's something that I've ended up in, but I absolutely love doing. And yeah, it's a brilliant bunch of people who do ESG. So very happy to be doing it.
So as you were growing up, did you know your father was such a legend in this space?
Yeah.
Did it take you to start practicing in this space for you to realize his reputation?
It wasn't until I started practicing in this space that I really realized, because when I trained many years ago at Magic Circle firm, and I was in the pensions team, and I remember asking about things like direct duties, which my dad had written about and lectured on, and they kind of went, yeah, it's something we think about, but not hugely. And this is 10, 15 years ago. So it was there, but it wasn't kind of very prominent. So it was something that I was aware of. And I went at law school, we had to write a dissertation, and I picked an area of environmental law, and that's what he was practicing. And this was the first time I realized that he was quite well known, because I went to see my tutor for my dissertation, and he went, your surname's Watchman. You're not related to Paul Watchman, are you? And I went, oh yeah, he's my dad, thinking he might go, oh, I've come across him. But no, we spent the next hour him asking me questions about him wanting to discuss him, tell me all the connections he had with him. And it's the first time I went, people know my dad a little bit. And then it wasn't until I got to Mills Reeve that I really became very aware of the fact he's quite well known in the ESG sphere. He'd become quite prominent on LinkedIn.
Yes,
and because we had different and because we had different surnames, people didn't realize to begin with we were related. So I'd get people emailing me saying, oh, you're interested in ESG. I've seen this really guy who writes a lot on LinkedIn. I think you might be interested. And I would get various posts sent to me, and I'd have to say, full disclosure, I do know him. And after, it was only really after his death I realized how influential he was. And when you see a post saying he's just been talked about in a Brazilian financial institution, they've done a tribute to him, you would go, okay, he is pretty well known.
Quite well known and very much admired, as you have now realized, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier a couple of things that are trending as far as hot topics with your clients. And one of those is the reporting. Tell me, what other things do you see as hot and emerging topics with respect to ESG and serving your clients?
Sure. So reporting is a really big one, because for years and years, we haven't had a huge amount of regulation legislation. And since 2015, when they had the Paris Agreement, we've seen a huge amount of regulation legislation coming through. But it's been quite bitty at times. There's been a lot of areas that haven't had a huge amount of regulation around them, especially it's only been really, if you're of a certain size, you do certain things, you've had to report. And it's often been comply or explain why you're not complying, rather than the kind of reporting we're seeing coming through now. So reporting is, like you said, a huge topic for our clients, coming through more. And we're then seeing, as a result of that, there's a real trend of clients proactively coming to us and saying, can you give us some training? Can you give us some support? But another huge trend that I'm seeing coming through is greenwashing. Not our clients greenwashing, but our clients becoming more and more aware of their responsibilities around greenwashing. And we've seen so much come through from the EU that we're seeing clients say, can you give us some training? We're hearing this term. There's been lots of decisions from the ASA and the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, and the Advertising Standards Agency in the last couple of years. So they're coming more and more aware that they have to actually be able to substantiate claims. And it's great, because them coming to us means that they are aware of this, and they know that actually they have to make sure that these claims are something they can back up, that they can get behind. And it's not just a case of throwing things out. And that also feeds really well into reporting aspect, because of all the regulations coming through from the EU about green claims and so on that we're expecting to see. But one thing that we did do at Mills Reeve, which was really interesting about our clients, was we did an ESG listening project. So we got a group of over 60 clients and asked them to give up an hour of their time to talk to us about ESG, about their journey, about where they are. And because we're a full service firm and we cross a lot of different sectors, we know that clients are all in different stages of their ESG journey. They all have different requirements. They all have different things that really keep them awake at night and bother them about ESG and reasons for doing it. So we wanted to see if there was any kind of themes coming out of those. And the themes that we did see coming out of clients in general were, how do you integrate ESG into your core business strategy? and also into your culture. What are those challenges around embedding ESG into your organizational culture? And also more and more of them are seeing ESG as a driver for competitive advantage. And then also, not only does it give you that competitive edge, but how does it ensure you future-proof your organization? So those were sort of 4 key trends we saw coming out of it. And it was fascinating because everyone has different ideas of why you do ESG. Everyone has different ideas of what does ESG mean to them as an organization, as a sector. But they were pretty much all aligned that this is important to us. This is something we know we need to do. And of course, when you've got clients who are willing to talk about ESG, it's a slightly self-selecting group because they know it's important. But it was great to see that across the board, they thought it was something important. They saw it was something that actually, it wasn't just a nice to do. It was something actually really critical to their business.
Well, and I think it's so interesting that you said one of them was future proofing, because frankly, that's what the word sustainability actually means, right? Is how viable are we for the long term? I think in this business, too many people use sustainability only in the green sense of the word, rather than the bigger concept, which is viability and future-proofing your business. And really that's what ESG is all about. So
yeah, and one thing, sorry,
ahead.
Pamela. I was going to say one thing that also came out from that report is that while you say we all think about that environmental side, for so many of these organizations, the big bit for them was the S, the people. What was their impact on their culture? What was the impact on society? What was their impact on their society? I should say community rather than culture, but what was their impact on their people? How do they retain employees? How do they get the best people in? So yeah, I completely agree. It's really interesting to see that people are not thinking about just in the kind of the E of ESG, but they're seeing it a little bit more broadly.
So what do you think Professor Paul Watchman would be saying now or thinking now with this? You mentioned earlier that it's evolving and changing all the time, and certainly it's a lot has changed in the last year. What would his perception be?
It always terrifies me when people say, "What would your dad think?" Because I just think, "Oh my goodness, I can't put words in his mouth." And I've said this to you before, Pamela, but it used to slightly terrify me when he posted something on LinkedIn and somebody would say, "Oh, I've seen he's been posting again." I never know whether they would be like, "Oh, it was brilliant," or going, "Oh my God."
Yeah, it terrified me too whenever I would get a little notification that said Professor Paul Watchman has commented on your post, and I was like panicking to see what he said.
But it meant that he thought you had something worth discussing or something worth saying. And I think for him, it would be ESG was something that ran through every fiber of his being. You can, when he got the Lifetime Achievement Award at Legal ESG, there was nobody really who embodies ESG more than my dad did, because it mattered to him so much. And he'd done work on ESG throughout his entire career. He started in Glasgow. He did various works on women's rights, homelessness. I mean, there's very few city law firm partners who can say they've actually practiced in those areas. So it ran through every fiber of his being. So the fact ESG has become such a big thing, I mean, he had to be at the forefront. He had to be doing it. And it made him excited. He would be sending people emails at all sorts of times of the night because that was what fired him up. So I can't put words in his mouth. But I think it would be I think nothing in the ESG world right now would surprise him. Yes. I think he would have entirely expected to see more regulation, legislation coming through. He would entirely have expected to see more and more companies seeing how important it was. There's been a lot of articles recently about how GCs, General Counsel, are taking on the ESG role and running with it. He wrote about that 5 years ago. He's always, he knew how important it was. So I don't think anything would surprise him. I think he also would say we can still do more. And he wouldn't, and because we always can. He was always slightly felt that things didn't go far enough. But then also, as we know, my dad didn't shy away from that debate. He was never afraid to put his head above the parapet. So I think he would be thrilled to see how much further it's going. I think he would be delighted to see its conversations continuing. I don't think anything would have surprised him, but I think he'd just be glad to see people are carrying on doing it.
Yep, I completely agree with that. And you mentioned that he received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Legal ESG Awards in June. There was also an award called the Professor Paul Watchman Young ESG Lawyer Award. Tell us about that, because I think that there's a lot to be said in why that award is called the Professor Paul Watchman Award.
Yeah, and this is the first time you and I met, because you reached out to me through a colleague and said, would I be interested in doing an award in his name? And my answer was absolutely yes. And when I met you, you said, oh, we didn't know whether you would say yes or not. But there was no question in my mind, because I remember that he spoke with you a lot and he had so much regard for you and Daniel doing legal ESG and bringing people together. And it was so exciting for him to see that there was a conference. But when we got together, I think we were both of a very similar, or the three of us were of a similar mind, that we couldn't have a Paul Watchman Law Firm of the Year. You couldn't have a Paul Watchman Company of the Year, because he would just, it was not what there would have been something about handing out an award with his name on it that he just wouldn't have sat well with him.
Right.
And the reason that I was so keen that we did something like Young Lawyer of the Year award was because the messages I'd received in the period after he died last July were about the time he'd given people, the time he'd taken to speak to people at the beginning of their ESG journeys, the fact that they'd reached out to him with a simple question and he'd inspired them in some way or other. And that's really struck a chord with me. And I felt after he died, I kind of was thinking about, like, what do I do in his honor and what do I do in his name if I did something? And it was always very much about the mentoring, the teaching, the bringing on younger people. And as soon as you said to me, what do you think the award should be about? There was no hesitation in my mind. And you and Daniel were very much aligned with that. So
Yes.
Yeah, we got together, we had a lovely lunch, we chatted about it, and you took it forward and came up with the title of Professor Paul Watchman Young Lawyer of the Year Award. And 3 brilliant finalists, and I think that my dad would be very pleased to see who those 3 finalists were. He knew Janetta Stilikova and David Alfrey, and he didn't know Josh Adone, but Josh started on his ESG journey a little bit later, so unfortunately didn't get to meet my dad, but I think he would have been very impressed with all 3 of them, because they were driving their own path, they were doing some brilliant things in that sphere, and he had some great debates with all 3 of them. So it was very nice thing to be able to do, to speak to those 3 and hand out that award.
And I am not at all hesitant to say that we are going to have lots of applicants next year as well, because so many young people are doing such great things.
Yeah.
So tell me, when we talk in 1 year's time, what will have changed
in
the overall ESG space?
So I think that's a really interesting question, because I was thinking about this earlier, and I think we're very much in a watch and wait situation, because we've just had a change of government in the UK. The new government have already made quite bold statements about things they want to do, like there's more. So I live in Cambridge, and in East Anglia, we've had some solar farms that have been on the cards for a while, have just been signed off and are going to planning permission, or they've got planning permission. There's a lot of planning regulations coming through. They've just announced, Rachel Reeves, Chancellor's just announced, there's going to be an ESG ratings regulator. So we've got a lot of movement from the new Labour government. So it's going to be really fascinating to see whether this is an onward trend or whether it's just in the initial period after the government's come in. But I'm fascinated to see what happens. And I think if it carries on this way, we should see a lot of change in the UK, in the EU, more and more regulations coming through. So we'll probably see a lot more tighter regulation. And in the US, it's going to be a bit of a watch and wait and see what happens with the election, because it could go one of 2 very different ways. So I think that's a real watch and see. One thing I'm really interested to see what happens as well is some of the kind of litigation claims that come through, because we're always seeing more and more of those. And there was a recent case, Ryan Climate in Orange, in the European Court of Human Rights, where it was the first time an international court had governed on what a national court would have normally governed on, and they held that the Swiss government had not taken account of their citizens' human rights significantly enough when putting in their net zero and climate change targets. And I think it'll be really interesting to see if that gets extrapolated out to companies, to other governments. So I think that will be an interesting thing. But in a year's time, I think I'd love to be able to look into my crystal ball, but as we've already said, that ESG sphere changes so rapidly and so much. I think it's very much a watch and wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And pursuant to your point about all these different elections that either have happened or are about to happen this year, things are changing dramatically all over the world.
Absolutely.
As the elections take place. So given the current challenging environment in ESG, what gives you hope?
Well, I think what gives me hope is exactly what we've just discussed about the Young Lawyer Award.
Mm-hmm.
That those couple of days, I still get goosebumps talking about it, but those couple of days at the Legal ESG Awards and sitting on a panel with David, Joshua, and Janetta, and hearing about their journeys into ESG, hearing about the fact they cover such different spheres, and they've driven this by themselves.
Yes.
Yes, of course, there's been opportunities along the way, but no one has taken those other than them. They have done everything to drive themselves into that sphere. And seeing people who are lawyers, and we know that a lot of the time when you talk about ESG, you can get knockbacks, because unless you can attach how do you make money from this, it can be sometimes quite challenging to get some traction on that. Because ultimately, as lawyers, we work in businesses. Law firms are businesses, so we have to find a way of making money. But the three of them have just taken that and they've run with it, and they've done a brilliant job, and they won't be the only ones. And as you said, hopefully there's a lot more young people coming through with their I say young people, I'm not even 40 yet, I'm saying young people, but a lot more younger lawyers coming through and with those ideas and pushing onwards, and also sitting in that room with all those people over the couple of days, and also at the awards dinner, seeing the senior people in the room who were there not because they had to be, they were there because they believe in ESG, that those young people will hopefully get that support they need. And I see it at Mills Reeve. Whenever I say to people, oh, I do ESG, and I talk a little bit about it, I'll get a couple of trainees come up to me afterwards and say, I'm really passionate about this. How do I get involved? Please, can I get involved with what you're doing? And that to me is so exciting. And you've got the future of law is people who are passionate about this, and you've got senior people who are readily supporting it. So I think that definitely gives me hope that we've got the right people coming through. And it's not for everybody ESG, because it is sometimes it's not in the traditional law firm mold of chargeable hours. It's sometimes you do get chargeable work, like I get involved in some sort of ESG due diligence aspects of projects, or I'm reviewing or reporting on ESG metrics, but it's not the kind of obvious chargeable work.
Right.
But they want to do it. They've got supporters. So that gives me a lot of hope.
And I would hope that maybe not a year from now, but at some point in the future, ESG is not going to be a separate thing or a separate area of law. It is just going to be the mindset through which all legal work is done, right? So
100%.
It is very much chargeable and billable because it's the way we advise our clients on everything.
Absolutely. And that's what my dad always said as well. Because I said, how do you feel about the fact that we won't necessarily have an ESG team? He said, brilliant. I don't want people to have an ESG team. It should be part of their DNA. It should be inbuilt in everything we do. People are still on that learning journey, but seeing kind of younger lawyers know that it's important, understand it, get it, and want to do it, it absolutely will, hopefully, fingers crossed, become part of that legal DNA. And there's been more and more things from the Law Society saying you need to be advising your clients on this.
Yep. So in every area of law, right? That's why it's E, S, and G. It covers every area of law.
Yeah, and I've even seen things saying that's not broad enough, saying it should have another E for employees, and it is ever changing. So things that we're talking about now, in a year's time, there'll be different subjects coming up. So yeah, I think it's so exciting to see where it goes. Slightly terrifying sometimes as well, but it's super exciting.
Keeps us on our toes, and I hope to have you back in a year's time, and we'll talk again about what's in store for ESG and just where we are at that point in time. Thank you so much for your time and your enthusiasm. And again, thank you for lending the Paul Watchman name to that wonderful Young Lawyer Award. It is truly our honor to be featuring him on that award.
No, thank you, Pamela, and thank you for having me on today, and thank you for honoring him in that way. It was a very special thing to be involved in, and I hope it continues long into the future.
It absolutely will. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.